Today we will be in the book of First Kings in the New Jerusalem Holy Bible, and we are in chapter 8, verse 62. The sacrifices on the Feast of Dedication. God bless you. The king and all Israel with him offered sacrifice before Yahweh. Solomon offered a communion sacrifice of 22,000 oxen and 120,000 sheep to Yahweh. And thus the king and all the Israelites dedicated the temple of Yahweh. On the same day the king consecrated the middle part of the court in front of the temple of Yahweh, for that was where he presented the burnt offerings, oblations, and fatty parts of the communion sacrifices, since the bronze altar which stood before Yahweh was too small to hold the burnt offering, oblation, and the fatty parts of the communion sacrifice. And then Solomon, and with him all Israel from the pass of Hamath to the torrent of Egypt, a great assembly, celebrated the feast before Yahweh our God for 7 days. On the 8th day he dismissed the people, who bade farewell to the king, and went home joyful and happy of heart over the goodness which Yahweh had shown to his servant and his people, Israel. Chapter 9. Yahweh appears a second time. When Solomon had finished building the temple of Yahweh, the royal palace, and everything else which Solomon had wanted to do, Yahweh appeared to Solomon a second time, as he had appeared to him at Gibeon. Yahweh said to him, I have heard your prayer and the entreaty which ye have before me. I consecrate this temple which you have built. I place my name there forever. My eyes and my heart will be there always. For your part, if you walk before me in innocence of heart and in honesty, like your father David, if you do everything that I command you, and keep my laws and my ordinances, I shall make your royal throne secure over Israel forever, as I promised your father David when I said, you will never lack for a man on the throne of Israel. But if you turn away from me, either you or your descendants, and instead of keeping my commandments and laws, which I have laid down for you, you go and serve other gods and worship them, then I shall banish Israel from the country which I have given them, and shall disown this temple which I have consecrated for my name, and Israel will be a proverb and a byword among all peoples. As for this once exalted temple, every one who passes by will be appalled, and they will whistle and say, why has Yahweh treated this country and this temple like this? And the answer will be, because they deserted Yahweh their God, who brought their ancestors out of Egypt, and they adopted other gods and worshipped and served them. That is why Yahweh has brought all these disasters on them. The bargain with Hiram. At the end of the 20 years that it took Solomon to erect the 2 buildings, the temple of Yahweh and the royal palace, Hiram, king of Tyre, had provided Solomon with all the cedar wood, juniper wood, and gold that he wanted. King Solomon gave Hiram 20 towns in the territory of Galilee. But when Hiram came from Tyre to view the towns that Solomon had given him, he was not pleased with them. He said, what kind of towns are these you have given me, brother? And to this day they are known as Kabul land. Hiram sent to the king 120 talents of gold. Forced labor for Solomon's building program. This is an account of the forced labor levied by King Solomon for building the temple of Yahweh, his own palace, the Milo, and the fortifications of Jerusalem, Hazor, Medigo, Gezer. Pharaoh, king of Egypt, mounted an expedition, captured Gezer, burnt it down, and massacred the Canaanites living there. He then gave the town as a dowry to his daughter, Solomon's wife, and Solomon rebuilt Gezer, Lower Beth Horon, Baalath, Tamar in the desert, inside the country, all Solomon's storage towns owned by Solomon, all the towns for his chariots and horses, and whatever Solomon was pleased to build in Jerusalem, in the Lebanon, and in all the countries under his rule. All those who survived of the Amorite, Hittite, Perizzites, Hivite, and Jebusite peoples, who were not Israelites, their descendants still remaining in the country, on whom the Israelites had not been able to enforce the curse of destruction. These Solomon levied as forced laborers, as is still the case today. Solomon did not, however, impose forced labor on the Israelites, for they were soldiers, his officials, his administrators, his officers, and his chariot and cavalry commanders. There were 550 officials in charge of the foremen over Solomon's work, who supervised the people employed on the work. After Pharaoh's daughter had moved from the city of David up to the palace which he had built for her, he then built the Milo. 3 times a year, Solomon presented burnt offerings and communion sacrifices on the altar which he had built for Yahweh, and set his burnt offerings smoking before Yahweh. Thus he completed the temple. Section C. Solomon the trader. Solomon as a ship owner. King Solomon equipped a fleet of Ezion-Geber, which is near Elath, on the shores of the Red Sea, in Edom. For this fleet Hiram sent men of his, experienced sailors, to serve with those in Solomon's service. They went to Ophir and took on 420 talents of gold, which they brought back to Solomon. The Queen of Sheba visits Solomon. Chapter 10. The Queen of Sheba heard of Solomon's fame and came to test him with difficult questions. She arrived in Jerusalem with a very large retinue, with camels laden with spices and an immense quantity of gold and precious stones. Having reached Solomon, she discussed with him everything that she had in her mind, and Solomon had an answer for all her questions. Not one of them was too obscure for the king to answer for her. When the Queen of Sheba saw how very wise Solomon was, the palace which he had built, the food at his table, the accommodations for his officials, the organization of his staff, and the way they were dressed, his cupbearers, and the burnt offerings which he presented in the temple of Yahweh, it left her breathless, and she said to the king, "The report I heard in my own country about your wisdom in handling affairs was true then. Until I came and saw for myself, I did not believe the reports, but clearly I was told less than half. For wisdom and prosperity, you surpass what was reported to me." How fortunate your wives are! How fortunate these couriers of yours, continually in attendance on you and listening to your wisdom. Blessed be Yahweh your God, who has shown you his favor by setting you on the throne of Israel. Because of Yahweh's everlasting love for Israel, he has made you king to administer law and justice. And she presented the king with 120 talents of gold and great quantities of spices and precious stones. No such wealth of spices ever came again as those which the queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. Similarly, Hiram's fleet, which brought the gold from Ophir, also brought back great cargoes of almug timber and precious stones. Of the almug timber, the king made supports for the temple of Yahweh and for the royal palace, and harps and lyres for the musicians. No more of this almug timber has since come or been seen to this day. And King Solomon, in his turn, presented the queen of Sheba with everything that she expressed a wish for, besides those presents which he gave her with a munificence worthy of King Solomon, after which she went home to her own country, she and her servants. As always, I love you.